Hi, I'm here with Mrs. Jean Siebert, and we're here to talk about student life at Lower Dauphin. Hi, I'm here with Mr. Jim Abraham, and we're here to talk about student life at Lower Dauphin. Good morning, I'm here with Mr. David Swaggart, and we're here to talk about student life at Lower Dauphin. Hi, I'm Jennifer Abraham, and I'm here with Mr. Clint Fackler, a 2003 LD graduate, and we're here to talk about student life at Lower Dauphin.
Well, we started on a very rainy day in September of 1960, and we graduated in June of 1965.
I graduated in 1974, and so I was there from like 69 to 74 through junior high school and high school.
I attended Lower Dauphin High School from 1984 to 1988.
Do you remember in school?
Well, I very much enjoyed English, and I enjoyed history, and also math. And I also enjoyed biology.
Why were these your favorite subjects?
I think that a combination of the very good instructors and also the subject matter. And of course, our class, we were in, I guess what was then called A section, so it was the same students for all the classes. So, of course, after all those years together, we enjoyed the things together and excelled as we did by being with each other and being stimulated by their company.
Subjects.
One of my favorite subjects in high school was typing, because when I went to high school, guys weren't allowed to, didn't take typing, but I took typing, and turned out that I was pretty good at it. So every marking period I would get an A, and my parents would love that. You know, they would see an A on my report card every time. So typing was one of my favorite classes.
Did you feel awkward being one of the only male students in the classroom?
No, it was actually rather fun, and the fastest typist got the best typewriter to work on. There were typewriters back then, and I had this big IBM typewriter, and everyone else had, it was an electric typewriter, everybody else had a manual typewriter. So I got to use the only electric typewriter in the class for about a semester.
Nice.
Well, I'll tell you what, I liked foreign languages. I enjoyed taking Spanish. I actually was attending high school at the time PDE changed some of the guidelines for a student needing to have a modern foreign language. So I had 3 or 4 years of Latin under my belt at the time, but I needed 2 years of Spanish. So I actually had to take Spanish, I think, my junior and senior year of high school. And I actually enjoyed it. The other class I enjoyed was photography. I was able to participate in that. And that was actually co-taught by Mr. Stroman and Mr. Stamen.
Okay.
And that was a neat experience because A, it was the first time I was ever in a co-taught class. And B, it was kind of groundbreaking because we were using cameras and taking pictures and developing things on film and paper.
Mm-hmm. So, why were these your favorite subjects? Was it the teachers, the students, the atmosphere?
It was the atmosphere they created. It wasn't necessarily the students I was with. Although Spanish was kind of fun because I was a senior and I was in there with freshmen and sophomores, so it was like I had this like level of supremacy or something, like I was much older than everybody. But definitely, hands down, the teachers created, I think, almost an environment of respect and safety, where you could go in there and feel safe to speak and talk frankly about things. So that was kind of nice.
That's wonderful.
Oh, well, I'm a history teacher, so history was definitely my favorite. Not my freshman year, because I had Mrs. Etter. And that's for Mrs. Etter. I didn't enjoy history at first with her, and then probably in like starting the third marking period, I really enjoyed history. I don't know why, I just started to like it, and kicked off my career then in enjoying history and making it one of my favorite classes to go to, and like I would take them as all the history classes that we could take, I would take as electives. That and probably chemistry was just as one subject was my favorite as well.
Teachers?
Yes, I do. My most memorable teacher would be then Mrs. Ball, what's her name now, Dr. Judith Whitmer. And also I thought Catherine Zeiders and Helga Rist and also Mr. Birchfield, very good teachers.
What made these teachers so memorable?
Well, they were excellent instructors and they really made us excel, I think, stimulated our thinking and our wanting to do well. And Mrs. Rist had been in a concentration camp and came here and was teaching German. And I'm sure, I mean, today you wouldn't have that anymore because, you know, the
Right.
teachers, she is retired, I believe she's still living. But, and Mr. Birchfield was just very dedicated to biology. He really was. And he thought we should all be dedicated. So, yeah.
Do you think these teachers had an influence on your life?
Oh, absolutely. In that respect, I would say that Mrs. Ball, Dr. Judith Whitmer, was probably the most memorable one for having an influence on my life. Just because of the fact that I communicate with people every day in my profession, and really she, not only in writing but in speech, was just very dynamic and really wanted us to have these tools to use. And I think we probably didn't appreciate that as much as we should have, but they were very essential, as we found out.
Yes, my typing teacher, Mrs. Conway, she was great. And one of my math teachers, Ed Romano, who I think is still a football coach here. Ed was one of my other favorite teachers.
What made these teachers memorable?
They were very good at what they did. They paid a lot of attention to you. They cared about the students and how they were doing, and they had great patience. And I think patience is the key to being a good teacher.
Do you think these teachers had an influence on your life?
Yes, in that I was a teacher out of college for about 4 years, and I remembered, you know, teachers like Mrs. Conway and Ed Romano, and I try to emulate, you know, their patience and their ability to relate to kids.
Nice. Teachers.
I do. Mr. Stroman and Mr. Stamen. I choose Mr. Stroman first because I actually had him in elementary.
Really?
At the Nye building in Hummelstown. He was my art teacher there. And then I went to middle school, and then he reappeared in high school, and I'm like, wow. So, but he was really cool, very engaging. And Mr. Stamen, and there were a few other teachers too that again, they kind of created a nice, safe environment and made it fun to attend class.
That's awesome. Do you think any of these teachers had influence on your life?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a fairly creative person, so I like to make things and I like to do things with my hands, and I like photography. I actually got to participate in the first computing class, so
That's awesome.
Yeah. They went out and bought computers the one summer between my junior and senior year. We walked in that year, and there was a whole classroom filled with old Texas Instrument. Well, they weren't old; they were actually new, but Texas Instrument computers. I think they had one for every 2 or 3 students, so it wasn't completely.
Wow.
And there was a dot matrix printer, so they had, it was very old time. I mean, but it was high tech back then. And that was kind of a game changer too, because now I work in technology, but at the time I struggled, but I just knew I wanted to do more with computers.
Sure. Do you remember?
Yes, and both of them are still here. When I was a sophomore, Mr. Hannanen came as a new chemistry teacher, and I had him as a sophomore, and then I liked him so much again that I took him for AP Chem my junior year. And it was very memorable. Mr. Hannanen had a lot of good stories, made chemistry fun, and especially my junior year, we had a small group because it was AP Chemistry, and as we would go through the different units, he basically let us create our own type of lab based on whatever the topic was. So that was good. I would also say that Mr. Longenecker, probably, I have to give it to him, was overall my most influential and probably my favorite teacher. And he's probably the reason why I am currently teaching history.
Why was he so influential?
He was just this papa figure. He was very endearing, very knowledgeable. I'm being nice to him right now because I have other stories, to the contrary. But he was just always so poignant in the way that he said things. You knew that he meant it and he felt it, and he made almost like a personal connection with history, even though some of the topics were hundreds of years in the past.
Do you think Mr. Handenen and Mr. Longenecker have influenced your life in any way?
Yeah, especially Mr. Longenecker. Mr. Longenecker was the first guy to really make me think about politics, actually think history through, and the cliche that history always affects the present and the mistakes we made in our past influence us today. I think that those things really stick out. Also the Stromboli. The Stromboli really stuck out for me. We went to his house, and it was very nice to have a teacher that you could also see as a real person, And there's often that stigma that the teacher's just this person that's in your room while you're taking your test or while you're learning. But he invited us to his house. We had Stromboli, and he makes very good Stromboli. We also went on a field trip to the Philadelphia Art Museum, which was also memorable. That was a good time. And just his daily. I had him for 3 years, so 3 years really makes a big difference when you have a teacher for that long. So yeah.
Very nice. Well, often.
I think so, yes. I think it's just great. I think there are so many more leadership opportunities for women. And I think one of the main leadership opportunities is through participating in sports, which, as I said, we had very little of that. And the other thing is that when I think back of the awards that one could win as a senior, the award for the girls was the Betty Crocker Homemaker of the Year award, and that was it. And I thought that was so ironic even then, because I wanted to study economics, not home economics.
Right.
Yes.
Do you think males and females had different expectations?
Yes, I do. I think then they did. I hope that now they do not, because I think that we've seen that women can do anything that men can do. Yeah.
Do you recall any rules that treated males and females differently?
Well, I think that when you were asking about what did parents think, I think parents were more strict when it was for dealing with girls than with boys. And again, I think that the expectation that you perhaps would go on to school was there, but more so for boys, definitely, at the time.
I really don't know. I would think that, the majority of kids respect each other, and I think that's basically the same. I don't think that has changed all that much, despite what you read and see in the media.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall any rules that treated males and females differently?
Well, I know one rule was when I took typing, they didn't have a problem with that, even though I was the only guy in the class. But I went up, I just remember this like it was yesterday, I went up and you had to walk around to where you signed up for classes. And I said, I want to sign up for shorthand. And this woman looked at me and says, you don't want to sign up for shorthand. I said, well, if I go to college, maybe it'll help me take notes. We're not going to have you sign up for shorthand. And they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me sign up for shorthand. So for some reason, I never forgot that.
So since this was a brand new computer class, never been done before at Lower Dauphin, how are the demographics in the classroom?
It's funny you ask that, because I would say it was probably 50-50 boys and girls. If anything, I think that class was encouraged to be taken by students as a business prep class. So I think girls gravitated more towards it in hopes of gaining skills for office administrative duties. So when we got in there, the class was vastly different. This was not a keyboarding class. you're going to sit behind a computer and write a simple COBOL program. And that's what we did, and we printed it out at the end. So I think everybody was immensely surprised and happy at the same time. I think people were pleased that this was not just another keyboarding class, but there were a lot of girls in that class. Yeah, you know what? We didn't have like a class prank, so there was no one big prank. It's not like we, made letters out in the football field or anything crazy like that. It was a lot of small pranks, and two that stick out in my mind the most was time spent in the cafeteria. They would often serve cornbread, and with the cornbread they would put honey in a little container, and they would also serve donuts. I don't know how that made it into the whole menu, but so we would scrape the white powder off the donut and mix it with the honey and then slather it between two cafeteria trays, and it created a glue, almost like an epoxy, and these trays would not peel apart. So we would then turn over probably 6 or 7 trays to the cafeteria workers that they would never, ever get apart. So they would throw them in the trash. The other prank that really stands out, because I remember it very well, my senior year, I had trig, I think it was trig, so it might have been junior year, with Mr. Shan. It was after third lunch, it was late in the day. Mr. Shan would always use the restroom during our class. It was a given. We would get into bookwork or do whatever, and he would walk out of the room directly across the hall into the men's bathroom. Well, in this trig class, there was at least 3 or 4 football players that had Shan as a defensive line coach. So one of them got a hold of a hall pass from another teacher, which was a 2x4 that was about 5 feet in length. So we're talking a long board. They took student desks out there, and they effectively locked Mr. Shan in the bathroom while he was going with student desks and a 2x4. Mr. Shan screamed for what felt like an hour. It was epic. But then they finally took the board out and let him out. And because it was football kids that did it, there was no real repercussions, so they kind of let the kids off easily. But those were the 2 biggies that stick out.
That's awesome.
Perfect, yes. My senior year, we had 2 that were very memorable. I think it was homecoming football game night. We had a student whose name was Freddie Daimler, and Freddie, great kid, very funny. He decided that during the halftime routine, the halftime show, he was going to strip down into a bikini Speedo and carry an American flag and run the whole way across the field. And to my understanding, I didn't see it like in person, but I saw it on film. And he got about halfway across the field, and he started getting out of breath. And the security guards from Hershey Park Stadium caught him, and he was, yelling, and people were clapping and cheering for him the whole way as he was let out of the stadium. It was a good one.
That must have been a sight to see.
Oh yes. And then the other one was my senior year. 2 twin brothers, Dan and Drew, and I'll keep their last name confidential in case they're still wanted. They stole a lunch tray every day and would put them in their backpacks, and then would leave and go home and deposit their lunch trays at home. So they did this unknowingly for most of the school year, and by about April, they had stolen so many lunch trays and we no longer could use the lunch trays because there were only a few left. So the district had to purchase styrofoam trays, and the last day of school, they brought all the trays in and dumped them next to the flagpole. And they had accumulated about 300 lunch trays.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
School years.
I think the one news story that I would think about above all others was the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November of 1963. In our time in school, we didn't have news media everywhere. We couldn't look at our cell phones and see what was happening from looking at the Penn Live or the USA Today app. But that was a real tragedy that occurred, and we were at school, and when it was announced. And what they did was everyone was asked to appear at the auditorium, and we were all seated, and then they made the announcement that he was mortally wounded, which some people didn't even understand, I don't think, what that meant.
Right.
But they just knew that it was from the faculty and the administrators, you know, having this grave thing to tell us. It was so earth-shattering, because that, in our lifetime, to that point in time, we hadn't experienced anything like that. The other would be the Cuban Missile Crisis, I guess, but definitely the assassination was very, very vivid in everyone's mind.
Years.
Well, the Agnes flood in 1972, that where the river overflowed, we had all that rain that kind of devastated, you know, places and towns, including Hummelstown, from Wilkes-Barre up north all the way down. So Agnes was a difficult time in '72.
How did the school deal with the event?
The school was, it happened in the summer, so it didn't have a whole lot of effect on the school year. But I'm sure the school was very helpful in helping people out. And I remember we had to go down to the fire hall to get water, because the water was contaminated. So that was one of the biggest events that took place while I was in school.
Yeah, as I pointed out earlier, AIDS, the HIV epidemic was becoming a big thing. I remember at that time, Chernobyl, that was pretty big, considering TMI had happened, you know, about 8 years prior, maybe less than that. But you know, we had a somewhat possibly could have been a similar event. The space shuttle exploding. It seems like a lot of terrorism, even back then. There were a lot of planes being taken over by different organizations, and so those were scary. The media outlets had a hard time getting things to us, so it wasn't as quick today. If an event happened, you may not know about it for days until it was reported on air. So, you know, you live in a different time now. We all do. You know, everything's instant.
Right. Did the school have any?
9/11. 9/11 is number one. That happened during English class for me. We actually turned on the TV because Mr. Longenecker was right down the hallway, and he somehow found out about it or saw it happen and came in and immediately told us to turn on the TVs. And we did, and we watched the second tower get hit. And I'll never forget that day, you know. And as most people that live through it won't. But I remember exactly when we came in, we turned on the TV. He turned on the TV, and we watched that second tower get hit and fall down in English class, and we were speechless. You know, we didn't know what to do. And Mr. McCullough, who is now a teacher here, was student teaching, and we like to josh him and give him a hard time because he was a student teacher. And on that day, there was nothing. You know, it was silence in that class. Yeah.
Surely. I think the best thing I can say is that I learned that you needed to apply yourself, and that would result in your accomplishments and continuing on, and I think I've used that at each level of my studies. But of course, I always feel that you do need a good foundation, and I think I got that here at Lower Dauphin, and of course at the old Hummelstown High School prior to that, in grade school.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Lower Dauphin provided a very good education for anybody who went there. You know, they gave you the opportunity to learn, and if you took advantage of that, you could do really well. If you didn't take advantage of that, then you may not have done so well. But I tried to take advantage of that, and it was always a very good school, good academic program, good extracurricular activities, and I think it's that way today.
Do you still use any lessons that you learned at Lower Dauphin?
Well, I had some issues in sports where I didn't think I had the best opportunity to excel, and so one of the lessons I learned was when somebody tells you that you're not smart enough or you're not good enough, don't believe them. and try again at the next level. And that's what I did, and I did pretty well in college.
Awesome.
I think I was thrust into education. I work now as a technology director over at Derry Township School District, and I think sometimes I'm in education because sometimes I'm trying to fix ill practices, kind of like right the wrongs.
Yeah.
I'm like I'm a huge fan of every student having a meaningful adult in their life. And I will say that Lower Dauphin, in my time there, I did have a few people like that. So I gravitated towards some teachers that kind of fulfilled my needs. And that's kind of what I still see needed in education today. So that's definitely.
That's wonderful. Do you still use any lessons that you learned at Lower Dauphin today?
Yeah, I learned about social mores and things like that. So I learned a lot about boundaries and when to talk, when not to talk, and I think it made me a better person.
That's awesome. Okay.
Very prepared for college, and I think that that's a testament to the teachers. Is we have done an outstanding job at preparing students to go on to the next level. And without going to Lower Dauphin, I don't know that I would have been prepared to do as well as I did in college. We also encourage and had encouraged to do extracurricular activities and learn how to balance your time and manage life in general. I definitely had an impact on me, being able to do all the different things that we did.
Do you still use any of those lessons that you learned at Lower Dauphin in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, and I try to pass those on to my students as well. I mean, we're meeting right now, and today, I've done the farm work, and I've gone to church, and I now have 2 kids, so I've learned to juggle my time and really enjoy that. Like, I'm not saying that I'm just running around, but without that, without the learning, the time commitment, the enjoying what you have, and also learning to manage your time and your skills, I don't think I would be where I am today.
That's wonderful.